And then there's this like fifth thing, and these are the catalysts. Somebody is proactive, and a proactive leader wakes up one morning and is like, if we don't get our act together and go on offense with progress and innovation and change, all of those four clusterfucks are going to happen to us, and we're going to be caught on defense. And I don't want to let that happen.
Hi, I'm Tracy Lovejoy.
And I'm Shannon Lucas. We are the co-CEOs of Catalyst Constellations, which is dedicated to empowering Catalyst to create bold, powerful change in the world.
This is our podcast, Move Fast, Break Shit, Burn Out, where we speak with Catalyst executives about ways to successfully lead transformation in large organizations.
I am so thrilled today to be able to talk with, I don't get starstruck often, Greg, but I'm thrilled to be here with Greg Larkin, known as the Anthony Bourdain of Business. He's the founder and CEO of Punks and Pinstripes, my people, a unique community of business punks, entrepreneurs, and executives that are a little disruptive, a little deviant, and a little defiant. His career journey is marked by significant contributions across various domains, from predicting the 2008 financial crisis to authoring the international bestseller, This Might Get Me Fired. I consumed this book in one night. I laughed out loud. I cringed at the pain. You have to pick up this book. In his role as VP of Product and Financial Services at Innovest, where he led the coverage of the banking and financial services, he made that first public prediction of the 2008 financial crisis, demonstrating his exceptional understanding of market dynamics and his ability to foresee significant economic events. Following Innovest acquisition in 2009, Greg continued to drive impact, taking on roles that span product strategy, innovation, product development at companies like MSCI, Bloomberg Intelligence, and as a consultant at Google. Outside his professional endeavors, Greg is a devoted father, husband, and brother, and has values that are deeply ingrained in his identity. As a product of Brooklyn, go Brooklyn! His roots have remained a constant source of inspiration and grounding throughout his amazing career. So good to have you here.
Thank you for having me.
All right, let's jump right in. In your own words, how do you identify or relate to the concept of catalyst?
Well, so I think there are certain situations in every company that require a business punk. And there's business as usual, where the primary responsibility of people is to sustain and perpetuate whatever happened the day before. And then there's these opportunities, these crises moments. Do you curse on your podcast? Is that?
Yeah, we absolutely do.
Title.
Yeah.
So there's like the 5 clusterfucks. Number 1, disruption. New technology, new entrants are starting to steal your market share. 2, financial underperformance. You're not doing as well as everyone expected you to do. 3, M&A. There's a new sheriff in town. You got acquired. You no longer have the power, the authority, the chain of command that you had before. Number 4, activist investors. Some dude from private equity or some activist investor like Carl Icahn realizes that you're fat, bloated, and complacent, fires everybody, and takes over your board, and is going to fuck shit up. And then there's this like fifth thing, and these are the catalysts. Somebody is proactive, and a proactive leader wakes up one morning and is like, if we don't get our act together and go on offense with progress and innovation and change, all of those 4 clusterfucks are going to happen to us, and we're going to be caught on defense. And I don't want to let that happen. It's very hard to be that person. I think that's why I call them business punks. You call them catalysts. But I think that's why that's necessary. If you don't have that, you're in an extremely jeopardized, vulnerable position as a business.
For you, is it a choice for people, or can they walk away from it, the business punks?
I couldn't do it. It's a choice for some people. And I think if you're good at it, if you're good at being a business punk, you kind of get this thing correct where um you make it very difficult for people to not get on board. Um the people who are the biggest business punks usually don't stay in big companies no, that's not true. They don't stay in big American companies for very long. Because we have a very vibrant startup ecosystem. There's a huge pool of venture capital. It's very easy to fire people over here. It's very easy to hire people over here. People are willing to take more risks. Because there's just bigger viable pools of money and pools of economic activity that if you don't like your job at Goldman Sachs, you can quit and be okay.
Mm.
Um, Credit Suisse and Deutsche Bank existed as these zombie institutions for about 20 years longer than their sell-by date. They should have been dead a long time ago.
Mm.
And that's because I think in a place like in Europe in particular, and you work for Vodafone, you can vouch for this, but you can't fire people. Not really. There is no meaningful startup ecosystem, or there's not really these giant $1 trillion like pools of venture capital looking for a place to park. So if you're a punk and you're stuck in one of those companies, your options aren't really, you don't have the option of leaving. In some cases that's good. It means that punks have to figure out a way to fit in and be an engine of progress and find a way to bend the organization to a certain extent to their way of thinking and doing. But it can be extremely suffocating and destructive, and it can have real psychological torture.
Yeah, we talk about trauma in the community, totally.
Yeah.
I'd love to, I mean, your book does an amazing job. I'm going to keep telling people, like, buy the book, read the book. But if you could share with our audience maybe a couple of the major challenges that you faced driving transformation in the organization, sort of building on what you just said. And, maybe how you overcame it, or maybe sharing a time when you failed and the learnings out of that.
Sure, a lot of failures. That happens a lot. I think the general headline is, in most organizations, obstructionism is the norm. Most organizations, I also think the innovation community has itself to blame for how problematic innovation actually is. I think that's been royally botched. And I think
Why? Say more about that.
I think the things that have become innovation doctrine, innovation lore, the dogma of it has been written by people that have never done it.
Yeah.
Clay Christensen was a smart, kind, good guy who never invented a thing in his life. Certainly not inside of a big company. Rita McGrath is an academic, smart academic, a very kind person. I like her personally, but she's never lived it. And there's just a lot of shit that that happens when you're not in the boardroom giving
Totally.
a workshop. And and it also has led to a lot of dogmatic thinking where the value of the credibility of the innovation thought leader is to do with their kind of academic criteria rather than like, how much stuff have you built that made lots of money?
And how many times have you failed and gotten the learnings out of that too? Totally.
And how many, you either like are launching new businesses that make shit tons of money and are investor defensible, or you're unfucking old businesses. And like, that's it. Let's not overcomplicate it and say like it's Horizon 2 or it's Horizon 3 or it's Horizon 1 or it's Blue Ocean this or Agile that. Who fucking cares? Like, no one keeps score in that way outside of the academic, mahogany clad walls of like innovation thought leadership. It's just, and I think seducing people into think they're doing it right when they don't actually like unfuck old businesses or create new ones gives a very false degree of security, because, and it actually tricks, in my view, a lot of the great catalysts and business punks into a trap where they find themselves in a cost center. You're
Yeah.
sitting there teaching people how to throw a post-it note party, borrowing from the same budget as the office Christmas party. And as opposed and where you have no credibility, zero authority. You're invited in when it's not very high stakes. You're not really thought of as the person who can, when the like the five crises start to materialize inside of an institution, and it's like change is urgent. It goes from sort of interesting and curious to urgent and important. You're not the one who's invited into the room in those instances. You're the one who is invited into the room where it's like, well, we can do an escape the room, or we can have a design thinking session. Which do you guys want to do? We'll have ice cream sundaes. And so I think there's the significance of it has been deeply damaged by the innovation community itself.
The significance of it is what is the it there?
Why innovation matters and who the innovators are.
Got it.
Has been deeply, in my view, destructively distorted by the people who have sort of set the table in terms of why you need to innovate and who does it well.
So what's your advice for people to get out of that spot where they're not brought into the room, they're not brought into the urgent conversations?
FOMO, fault, and F you pay me.
Okay.
Those are the three competing pillars that exist in every institution 100% of the time.
I got FOMO. I got if you pay me. What was the middle one?
FOLP, fear of losing power.
Great.
And if you and the least important of all three of those things at any given moment in time in almost every industry and almost every company is FOMO. It's true. Goldman Sachs, ExxonMobil have never been disrupted by a new entrant or a startup. There is no blockbuster in the lore of those institutions. They never had a New York Times moment where you wake up one day, or a Kmart moment where you wake up one day and holy shit, Amazon just came out of nowhere and killed us. Most industries, most companies, there is no psychological scarring in executive leadership that's like, if we do not go on offense, we're going to get crushed. There is no institutional memory of that ever happening, because it hasn't ever happened. And to go into those industries as if you can speak to them like they have the same muscle memory as Amazon does, will have the same sense of urgency about being tech first or innovation first or catalyst first, is a very stupid and misguided, because the biggest crises they've experienced at a place like Goldman Sachs is the 2008 financial crisis, which was not disruption induced. It was just economic induced. ExxonMobil's doing great still, despite the fact that energy transition is happening. And so I think you have to go into them speaking to them on at their table, not yours. And the more you're like innovate or die, the more they're gonna not take you seriously. You have to speak to them in terms of FOLP and F you pay me. And FOLP is the hardest one to solve. Fear of losing power. Anyone who is an innovation champion or claims they're an innovation champion inside of a large institution is also deeply afraid of losing their job, losing their authority, losing their status, and losing their money, no matter what they say. And what you encounter if you're someone who's a great agent of progress inside of those institutions is the wall of obstructionism. The skeptics, the cops, the traditionalists, the territorialists, and the capitalist. all of those personas of obstructionist are very real. If you haven't encountered one or all of them, it's because you haven't pushed hard enough for anything. And that's the biggest, like, being bulletproof in the face of obstructionism is the most important
Yeah.
skill that you need to develop as an agent of change.
I totally agree. And I had shared with you earlier, like, I don't live life with a lot of regrets. It's my anti-motto. But like, one of the big life regrets was that I didn't just walk into the CEO's office at one point and be like, this is what I see. This is where we could take this. Is that where you want to go? And because I was going to leave anyway. Right. So it's like just being that bulletproofness. How can Catalyst get bulletproof?
Well, so I think it's the same thing as like a quarterback in the NFL or what makes Tom Brady. I know this is a shitty sports reference, so bear with me, but like Tom Brady is the best quarterback who ever played American football. He also was a terrible athlete. He's he was one of the slowest players in the league. He wasn't strong. He couldn't bench press very much. Like he was on every athletic test, he was not good at his job. But he had this thing. He could read the defense and understand how to get through it every time. And in the same way, being a great bulletproof innovator means every time you encounter an obstructionist, there's a play that you need to be able to call in order to get past them. When the skeptic says, I don't think your idea is a good one, I think it sucks. Do not pitch ideas, pitch outcomes. Only approach a skeptic after you've started to put points on the board and then say, hey, this is working. Do you want to be involved in it working or not?
Yeah.
The risk is that there's more of a risk for them saying no than saying yes.
Totally. Which I'll go back to your book, like great storytelling, and your opening scene is all about that, which is like, it was such a great hook. It's just like, yeah, we've got the customers on board now. So what are you going to do about it? We've got the data points. I want to jump to, in the interest of time, one of the things that you talk about in the book is the exit strategy for the business punks. And it's not something that a lot of people talk about, but it's definitely connected to this point that we're making, which is, at some point, if you don't want to languish, I would say, in a corporate environment where you're having to navigate all that stuff, you're going to have to make the decision. And so can you just talk through some of the examples? I think you had like 5 exit strategies for the punks.
Probably did. I wrote the book about 5 years ago, and I'm like, shit, I forgot I wrote that chapter.
That's okay. I totally get it. But off the top of your head, extemporaneously, like what
Yeah,
advice
sure.
would you give to people? Because it's like, and I'll just give some context too. One of the things that we help Catalyst with, which you and I were talking about, which is like, if I want to create like this change that's, a few more steps out than the appetite of the organization, I have to either decide whether I can take them there with me, or that I'm not going to be able to do that. Those are the only 2 options really. And then what? And so, yeah, if you could talk about, and then what for the Catalyst.
Yeah, so I think you have to kind of frame that in probably a few different dimensions, right? So one of the things is, if you're building something new, what's the right place for it? Should it, and then the other question is where are you trying to go? Like, if you win, if you're successful, where do you want to go with this? And so you kind of have to break that down between the product or the venture that you're building and and what's right for you with your career. And I'm one of the habits I've never been able to break from my time on Wall Street is I'm just data obsessed, and I'm always looking for weird streams of information that like give a kind of contrarian perspective on what's happening in the world. And I'll go there in a second. But so look, there's basically 3 things you can do with a new product. One of them is a walled garden. It's a separate business unit inside of the organization. that's a very hard thing to pull off. At a certain point, people are going to be like, hey, why is that competing against my product? Or why is that getting resources when it's not really a cash cow? Um, so people are going to resent a walled garden for the autonomy that it has. Um, Very often, a walled garden equally does not, it coddles the venture in such a way where as soon as it starts to really need access to a bigger market for scalability, when it's sort of moving beyond its first initial customer validation or its first glimpses of product market fit, you've never had to navigate that territorialist bullshit where people are like, don't ever speak to my customer, I'll kill you. And you start talking to perhaps investors on a quarterly earnings call, like, we have this new thing, it's starting to make money, you should be really excited, our forecast for the upcoming quarter is whatever. And then you find that politically you can't do it. You have to deal with all of these territorialist, turf wars that you never had that fight before you got married. You'll fuck yourself before you even try to get off the ground. All right, but that's the walled garden. It's got some hair on it. Then you have this bear hug where it's like, great, this thing has really started to take off. What we're going to do is fold that into an existing business unit. We're going to call it a new feature inside of that business unit. And usually soon thereafter, the team has just been like, the life has been squeezed out of them completely. It looks no different. All of its growth has been smothered. It doesn't do anything. Essentially, it becomes a sort of internal service provider. Then you have spin-offs, which I think are very interesting and exciting, where something that may have started inside of a walled garden starts to grow and grow, and they do have those territorialist turf wars, and it's like, okay, you know what? We are going to spin this off. We want to be, we'll provide you with capital. I actually worked for two spinoffs, one of which I loved, and the other which was like, can we please come back to JP Morgan? Sorry, not JP Morgan, Morgan Stanley. But spinoffs can be thrilling because basically you're taking this nucleus of entrepreneurial energy and success and growth, and you're like, hey, what would happen if we were to just strip away all of the obstructionist bullshit that has held us back? If we only had ourselves to answer to, how many times have we built epic shit that just died or was slowed down for like no good reason at all? We just took all of that away. Doesn't everyone win, including the legacy company that's going to have a piece of our equity?
I agree. That's why I went to Cisco, because I was like, I think that's one of the most interesting models of creating change out there.
It doesn't happen very often.
Totally. And it's not without complications, obviously, but how you're structuring things internally from a compensation perspective towards that transition, like the devil is in the details, but I agree. All right, so that's 3.
And then the other one is you leave. And that can range from like honorable discharge to there's actually 2. There's another exit, I would say, as well. So that can be like honorable discharge to like, you're fired, pack your shit, get out of here. Both are totally acceptable. And then I think there's this other one where like kind of what happened with AWS. AWS was an incubated basically because they could not find a cloud service provider that could handle the volume of data and analytics that Amazon was producing. So they built their own. And then they started to sell that to other people. And eventually AWS, essentially, like Andy Jassy was the CEO of AWS before he became the CEO of the whole company. And I think that's That's a really interesting model where there's like this new normal that happens because the innovation, which started out as this sort of incubated solution, is so effective and has its own cultural way of running and operating that they're like, you know what? Can you do that thing everywhere? Can you make all of us more like you? Um, it, you don't see that very often. I think Amazon is definitely an anomaly. Sorry, it's freezing in here.
It's all good.
Um, um, but it's cool. It doesn't happen a lot.
Yeah.
But when it does, it's wonderful.
Fascinating. Yeah. I mean, Apple would probably be another company just with their the different channels that they got into. But anyway, I want to go back to, because it's kind of connected to everything that we just talked about. You asked a great question, which I'll slaughter with the reframe, so feel free to say it back again. But you're like, what is the impact or outcome of, activating the business punks in a state sanctioned kind of environment? And I'm wondering, like, how you process that.
Um, I have an alternative model, and I don't know that mine is better. It has different outcomes. I think there's ways to do it and that are both. Let me zoom out for a second. I think we are in a world of corporate cognitive dissonance that has become fucking rampant. Just because you sponsor your female executives to go and become members of Chief doesn't mean you're a DEI champion. It doesn't stop the fact that you're still stale, pale, and male. It just fucking doesn't. And the fact that you celebrate Black History Month doesn't mean you're any darker.
Right.
You know, and the fact that you have an innovation lab or a catalyst program doesn't make you a better champion of innovator empowerment or innovation, the noun. It doesn't. And so I think where I get very skeptical, I suppose, is creating opportunities for lip service. Most companies will take those opportunities and it becomes a decoy. And I'm very skeptical of decoys. I assume decoy. That's not to say that the people who created Chief are trying to like create a pretense of equity and inclusion and empowerment. I don't believe they are, but they do have a business model which on a certain level is you could argue that it's part of the problem at this stage. And I think a lot of innovation initiatives that are state sanctioned are an excuse to not innovate at a certain point.
It's fascinating because I also think that there's the word innovation comes with so much baggage. And so there is also the question of state sanctioned, but solving wicked big problems. Like you were talking earlier about, like, I want to work with great people on meaningful products and get paid well for it, right? And so it's just like, if you can create that container, which is what we see in our work, and we've stopped for the most part using the word innovation because it comes with all that baggage, right? All right, I want to go back. I have two more questions for you, so I'll prep you.
Wait, I just want to go back for a second.
Sure.
I think there does need to be a certain level of state sanctionedness. And I think in moments of urgency and importance where you're like accountable to investors for getting this right, where you're accountable, like where you're radically, all the obstructionists need to cut that shit out because this is for real. And yeah, FOMO is happening right now. Like we're under pressure where if we don't rapidly accelerate some progress that we have not been taking seriously, we're going to be in really deep shit.
Totally.
And and those windows of opportunity are a very different level of state sanctioned catalystness.
Yes.
Um, and I think having the scaffolding in place for that to be the thing that happens is very important, but that's not usually how it works. Like the sort of lowercase empowerment of like, look, here's how you can be coached to be a catalyst that's better is different, I think, than building the sort of institutional scaffolding so that the agents of progress and empowerment and transformation that are there are the people that you know to call on when those moments of urgency happen.
Yes.
And I think that's the distinction that's hugely important. And I
It
also
is.
think that there's an external community that's really underinvested in. And granted, that's a self-serving thing for me to say, like Punks and Pinstripes is an external community, but like knowing that you are not alone and
Yes.
you are a business punk and being surrounded by people who are making it work, who are setting the table, setting the agenda, who have the confidence to leave when they realize they cannot keep going any further and they're leaving a lot of money and opportunity on the table. And having constant empowerment and solidarity and deep vulnerability with them, if you don't have that, if you're entirely restricted to that community within the four walls of your institution, um, I don't think you're going to be able to do very well. I think you're going to you will suffocate. I don't know. I had shit at Bloomberg when I was the head of innovation where they'd be like, hey, we're going to send you off to, and a few other people who are a little bit edgy, and we're going to send you off to like the Deloitte Digital Innovation Summit. You're going to love it. It's so edgy. I'm like, what? Because I mean, some fucking dude is sitting there talking to me about like safe agile methodology. And I'm not saying it was completely useless, but it was all tactical. It wasn't punk.
Yeah.
It was state sanctioned. It was about as punk as Phil Collins. It was like safe.
I totally agree. And it's interesting. Like, so we have these classes that Catalyst come through and, organizations might send a cohort from our Catalyst programs. We have the data. We're obsessed with data too. Tracy's a researcher. And so we know every class, all cohorts, all 20 skills have improved across the board. The number one thing that Catalysts say about going through the program was being with the other Catalysts from in their organization and external to their organization.
Yeah.
And there's this frictionless and this energy. And then if you can add that to getting them into the room, it's like an 11 on the scale of like, the energy is so here. So I agree. I think that creating the safe and vulnerable spaces is really important. And there's, just to respond to two other things, we could talk to you for hours. You were talking about like, what is that moment where the state sanctioned, support is meaningful, and it's when you're getting disrupted. And 100%, like we're working with this satellite company who didn't see SpaceX coming out of the, you know what I mean? Like that happened fast. And so their lunch is getting eaten. But interestingly, in those moments, what happens is there's an aspirational culture. It's like they know all the words, they can say all the things, but then and this isn't just this company, this is so many companies that we work with that are at this disruption moment. We know we need to create psych safety. We know we need to, empower people. They can say the words, but there's this legacy culture that's not being dealt with. So even if the people at the top, the state sanctioned people are on board, you have this layer of middle management that have been successful for the last 10 years in their career in the old culture. And so there's this challenge there. Okay. The question that I wanted to ask you, which we won't have time for, but I want to encourage people to read the story about your work during the Arab Spring and how you had this insane insight and idea. You worked 14 hours over the weekend and you got energy. It's like such a catalyst moment. And then it gets put into the machine and the McKinsey comes in. It takes 6 months to get the PowerPoint done. And the executive at the end is like, I wish you had told me 6 months ago. Do you have like one or two sentences of advice for how to navigate that for future people?
Yeah, never pitch an idea, pitch a fucking outcome. And if someone is like, great, thank you for pitching an outcome, what we're now going to go do is retroactively squeeze you into a litany of fake work that is the way in which we put points on the board and build things that are of significance, say no.
Yeah.
Built. If you're concerned that I haven't gone through certain constraints, but like we're past that. And look, Elon Musk is a controversial figure. He's a deeply flawed human, but he's probably the best product leader of our lifetime. And if you notice, Elon Musk, all of his innovations are in industries that had not had a new entrant ever. Rocket ships were all built by Northrop Grumman and Boeing and a bunch of really old aerospace and defense manufacturers. Cars were owned by Detroit and Germany and Japan, period. They had never seen a new entrant. If you are in an institution that cannot question every requirement that it takes to get things done and cannot delete bullshit and bureaucracy and bloat from the system in order to reduce cycle times, to get points put out on the board, to solve hard problems and to make money from solving them. Institutions, you just mentioned the middle management layer, the extent to which that bloat, those requirements are entirely based on dogma, and this is the way we've always done it, and fear, rather than actual regulatory pressure or economic constraints or technical incapacity. You don't know how severe that is until you actually start to delete it and delete those requirements and extract those pieces of the system. And the minute you go and you put it on board, people are going to freak the fuck out and be like, hey, you need to start, we're going to start over, but do it with Accenture this time. And
Yes.
spend $8.5 million on a bunch of like, you know, dev spec ops people in Accenture. Yes. And now your cycle time is 1.5 years. You did it in a weekend. We did it in a weekend. Totally. I've experienced this so many times. And totally. If you do not have the testicular and ovarian fortitude to be like, this is a waste of time and money. If I need to go higher up the food chain and enlist someone to fight for this waste to not spend that money, I will. If you can't do that, then first of all, you don't have to. I'm simply saying that you need to understand that you're leaving, you're going to regret it. You're going to look back on that, having gone through that and not opened your mouth. And that will be something that you look back on and you're like, I could have left, taken that to another institution. I could have, like, you're costing yourself. There is an opportunity cost to allowing yourself to be squeezed in to that system once you have demonstrated that you're capable of operating that much faster, smarter, better, and cheaper. If you allow that obstructionism to be the norm of your life without ever being able to challenge it, you're not going to have a hard and easy time living with yourself.
Amen. Amen. As I said, I could go on and on, Greg. This was such a fascinating conversation. Do you have a call to action for our listeners?
Yes, go to punksandpinstripes.com. It is currently called Punks and Pantsuits, but on April 1st, April Fool's Day, it's going to go back to Punks and Pinstripes.
Awesome.
Subscribe to our newsletter. Follow me on LinkedIn. We are opening up new chapters in LA, Chicago, London, Austin, and someplace else that I can't remember right now.
Amazing. Amazing. Thank you for your allyship for women. Appreciate it. To our audience, thank you so much for listening. If you'd like to learn more about how to accelerate positive change, go to our website, catalystconstellations.com. Of course, be sure to check out the book, Move Fast, Break Shit, Burn Out. If you have other catalysts in your life, hit the share button and send the link their way. Thanks again, Greg.